Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful for You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The afternoon sunlight spilled across Los Angeles in streaks of gold, catching the glittering glass of Forrester Creations offices and glinting off the polished floors as Liam Spencer, heart hammering in his chest, adjusted his tie for what felt like the 100th time, rehearsing in his mind the words he'd been carrying for weeks, the words that had taken root in him the moment Hope Logan had smiled at him with that mixture of warmth, hope, and trust that made his chest ache and his thoughts scatter in every direction. He had always thought he knew what it meant to love, but nothing, not even the dizzying chaos of his past entanglements with Steffi or the painful heartbreaks that had left him questioning himself, could prepare him for the sheer, almost unbearable intensity of what he felt when he looked at Hope, standing there in a pale blue dress that clung delicately to her curves, hair cascading softly around her shoulders, eyes wide and sparkling with anticipation and curiosity. Because she had noticed the slight nervousness in his gait and the way he kept glancing down at the small velvet box he held hidden in the pocket of his jacket, the one containing a ring so perfect and understated it almost seemed to reflect Hope herself, as though it had been designed by fate to match her smile, her laugh, her very soul, and Liam, breathing deeply to steady himself, tried to focus on the words, the simple, yet infinitely complicated words that carried the weight of years of longing, mistakes, reconciliation, and a love that had been tested by fire, betrayal, and heartbreak but had somehow endured, because no matter the obstacles, no matter the drama of past rivalries and the interference of family, of ex-lovers, and the endless scheming that seemed to follow him like a shadow, Liam knew in that moment that Hope was the one, the person he wanted to share every sunrise and sunset with, to fight every battle with, to comfort and to be comforted by, and when he finally stepped forward, hands trembling slightly yet determined, he felt the air shift, charged with tension and possibility, the quiet hum of the office fading into insignificance as every other sound seemed to recede, leaving only him, Hope, and the pulsing heartbeat of a love story that had always felt inevitable, almost preordained, and as he dropped to one knee, the velvet box opening to reveal the delicate, sparkling ring, his voice caught for a brief second before pouring forth, full of sincerity, vulnerability, and an almost desperate hope, the words spilling out in a rush as if the universe itself demanded that they be spoken now, in this moment. Hope, will you marry me? And the world seemed to pause, the air hanging heavy with anticipation, Hope's hands flying to her mouth in shock, tears shimmering in her eyes as the emotional weight of the question pressed down on her like the tide, memories of every moment she and Liam had shared rushing through her mind, the laughter, the arguments, the tears, the near losses, the reconciliations, the unspoken promises made in quiet moments when no one else was watching, and she felt her heart swell and her breath catch as the answer, unhesitating and absolute, formed on her lips, ready to change the course of their lives forever, just as across town, in a dimly lit room where the shadows clung to the walls like whispered secrets, Sheila Carter paced with a ferocity that bordered on madness, eyes blazing as she clutched her phone, her thoughts a tangled storm of obsession, envy, and protective possessiveness over the man she had fixated on for decades, because Sheila, despite everything, despite all her past crimes and the walls she had built around herself, had always viewed Hope as an obstacle, a rival in the most primal sense, and as she learned of Liam's proposal through a carefully planted source, a confidant who had inadvertently shared the details over a careless conversation, her mind ignited with visions of what she would do, the lengths she would go to, the terrifying clarity of her intentions sharpening like a knife, and without hesitation, in a way that was both chilling and methodically calculated, she muttered under her breath, a promise and a threat wrapped in the same breath, that if anyone were to take Liam from her or stand in her way, she would not hesitate, would not falter, would eliminate the competition with an intensity that could only be described as merciless, a thought that sent a shiver through her own spine even as it hardened her resolve, and as she schemed, plotting her next move with the meticulous care of a predator stalking its prey, she could almost see the perfect scenario unfolding, manipulating circumstances, preying on weaknesses, exploiting secrets, and bending reality to her will, because Sheila had never been one to accept defeat gracefully, and Liam, innocent and hopeful as he was in his bubble of joy with Hope, had no inkling of the storm gathering just beyond the horizon, a storm fueled by obsession, vengeance, and a twisted sense of devotion that had haunted her for decades. And back at Forrester, the tension between Liam and Hope was punctuated by the nervous laughter of co-workers who had gathered discreetly, sensing the magnitude of the moment, sensing that history was being written in real time, while Hope, tears now freely rolling down her cheeks, nodded emphatically, whispering the single word that would forever bind their lives together, yes, and Liam, overcome with relief, joy, and an almost childlike disbelief, slipped the ring onto her finger, the band glinting brilliantly in the sunlight, and in that instant, time itself seemed to stand still, capturing the raw, unfiltered emotions of love, triumph, and the precariousness of happiness in a world where danger and drama lurked around every corner, because even in their blissful engagement, there was the shadow of Sheila's promise, an unspoken threat that hovered like a dark cloud, reminding them that love in their lives had never been simple, had never been safe, and that the moment of pure joy they were experiencing was as fragile as the crystal glasses on the nearby conference table, as delicate as the trust between them, and as they embraced, holding each other tightly, their hearts beating in unison, Hope laughing through her tears and Liam whispering assurances that nothing would ever come between them again, the narrative of their lives was simultaneously being rewritten and threatened, the stakes higher than ever, because Sheila's vow to murder the competition wasn't just a passing thought, it was a plan, a potential tragedy poised to intersect with the perfect moment of love, a stark reminder that happiness for Liam and Hope would never come without cost, and that the entanglements of family, past lovers, rivalries, and dangerous obsessions were never far behind, always ready to crash into the present and complicate the future, making the triumph of the engagement all the more bittersweet. As the camera of life in their world zoomed in on the details, the glint of the engagement ring, the tears on Hope's face, the nervous but ecstatic smile of Liam, the whispers of congratulations from coworkers, and then, miles away, the darkly lit room where Sheila plotted, her eyes glinting with a mixture of anticipation and menace, knowing that while the world celebrated, she would find her way, she would strike, and the fragile happiness of Liam and Hope would be tested in ways that only Sheila Carter could orchestrate, because in the tapestry of the bold and the beautiful, love and danger are never separate, and every triumph carries the shadow of a threat, every joy the weight of obsession, and as Liam pulled Hope close, whispering promises of forever and pledging to shield her from all harm, the audience couldn't help but hold their breath, caught in the tension between euphoria and peril, knowing that the engagement was a moment of triumph but also the spark that would ignite the next round of drama, rivalry, and potential violence, a narrative that had played out countless times yet never lost its emotional punch, because in their world, love is always worth fighting for, yet always comes at a price, and as Liam and Hope shared their first kiss as an engaged couple, sealing their commitment with a tenderness that made every obstacle they had overcome feel worth it, Sheila, somewhere in the shadows, smiled to herself, a slow, deliberate smile that promised that this story was far from over, that the stakes were higher than ever, and that the battle for Liam's heart, and perhaps even his life, was just beginning, a battle that would intertwine past grudges, present passions, and future betrayals, setting the stage for a drama so intense that every viewer would feel the tension knotting in their stomachs, every moment amplified by the knowledge that in the world of the Forresters and the Logans, no happiness is permanent, no love unchallenged, and no engagement free from the specter of danger, obsession, and the unrelenting, terrifying devotion of Sheila Carter, whose declaration to murder the competition now hung in the air like a guillotine over the blissful moment, turning a perfect engagement into the starting gun of a thrilling, suspense-laden narrative that promised heartbreak, revenge, and the inexorable collision of love and peril that defines the show, leaving audiences both cheering for Liam and Hope's love and holding their breath in dread at the shadow looming just behind, a shadow that reminded everyone watching that in the world of the bold and the beautiful, even the purest joy is always accompanied by a threat lurking in the wings, waiting, planning, ready to strike when least expected, ensuring that while hearts may soar, fear and suspense are never far behind, and as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across Los Angeles and illuminating the sparkle in Hope's eyes and the determined, protective gaze of Liam, the narrative tension of love and danger intertwined seamlessly, a masterful testament to the complexity of human emotion, the fragility of happiness, and the ever-present influence of obsession, jealousy, and past sins, setting the stage for the next chapter in a story where every smile is shadowed by a threat, every vow of forever by a lurking menace, and every declaration of love by the chilling possibility of violence, a perfect, tense, emotionally charged moment captured in the endless, intricate, and dramatic saga of Liam, Hope, and Sheila, their fates forever entwined in a web of passion, obsession, and peril, proving once again that in this world, no love is simple, no engagement free of danger, and no moment of happiness safe from the dark, calculating presence of those who would stop at nothing to get what they want. Sheila took a step closer, lowering her voice. Because I want you to stay out of what's coming. Taylor Hayes has been pushing her luck, and if she doesn't stop, she's going to end up in the same place you almost did, underwater, gasping for air. Lee's blood ran cold. You're threatening her? Sheila's grin widened. No. I'm warning her. There's a difference. Lee stood up, fury flashing in her eyes. You don't scare me anymore, Sheila. And if you lay one finger on Taylor, I'll make sure you regret it. You think you're untouchable, but you're not. Not this time. Sheila's expression turned cold, and for a moment, they stood inches apart, locked in silent war. You should be careful, Lee, she murmured. You've already cheated death once. Don't push your luck. Then she turned and walked out, calm, confident, dangerous. By evening, the emotional storms that had started that morning had reached everyone. Hope and Liam were celebrating their engagement quietly at the cabin, laughing, cooking dinner, pretending for a few hours that nothing else mattered. Brooke was on the phone with Ridge, gushing about the engagement while Ridge tried to calm a fuming Steffi. Deacon was pacing in his apartment, wondering how to protect Taylor from Sheila's wrath while knowing Sheila might already be plotting something. And Lee, alone in her office, made a quiet call to a friend in the police department, whispering that she believed Sheila Carter was about to strike again. As the night settled over Los Angeles, every character found themselves staring into the shadows of their own choices. Hope and Liam held each other close, promising that this time would be different, that love would conquer everything. Taylor sat by her window, thinking about Deacon's question, and about Sheila's threat. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure if she could handle another war. Deacon poured himself a drink and whispered to the empty room, "What the hell have I done?" And Sheila, standing on a dark cliff overlooking the ocean, whispered to the wind with a chilling calm. "No one takes what's mine. Not Taylor. Not Lee. Not anyone." Her eyes gleamed in the moonlight as she smiled, whispering one last promise to herself. "By the time I'm done, they'll all regret crossing me." The camera would fade out there, the soft echo of waves crashing against the rocks mixing with Sheila's quiet, unhinged laughter, the kind of sound that reminds you that in the bold and the beautiful, peace never lasts for long. The sun hadn't even risen the next morning before Brooke was already on the phone, voice trembling with that motherly urgency that made everyone stop and listen. She'd called Taylor first, not out of paranoia but because mothers have a radar for danger, and Brooke's gut told her this was bigger than jealousy or another Sheila meltdown. It felt planned, cold and methodical in a way Brooke hadn't seen in Sheila before. "Taylor, sweetheart. You heard her, you know how she is," Brooke urged. Keeping her voice low though her heart raced, "Please don't go near Deacon today. Let him come to you if he needs help, don't seek her out or provoke her, and call the police if she so much as breathes the wrong way." And Taylor, who was still shaking from the restaurant, wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee she hadn't realized she'd made, letting Brooke's words sink into the parts of her that had once been unshakable, because what Brooke said carried weight and history, and Taylor had learned to listen. Meanwhile Deacon, cursing himself for dragging Taylor into this mess and for the way his feelings for her had blindsided him, decided he wasn't going to sit back and be the reason someone got hurt. He went to Hope's cabin first, because even in the middle of his chaos his first instinct was to protect those he cared about, and Hope opened the door in a silk robe, hair mussed from sleep, eyes clouded with the kind of happiness that made Deacon's chest ache for reasons he didn't want to name, so he blurted out the warning like a prayer. "Hope, Sheila's dangerous. She threatened Taylor. She said she'd kill her. She's unstable, and she might try to ruin your engagement out of spite." And Hope's face, which had only moments ago been soft with the afterglow of Liam's proposal, hardened in an instant because the world of love and romance in which she'd been floating all night collided with the cold reality of Sheila Carter, A woman who never knew when to stop and whose love had always been a weapon. Liam, who had been in the kitchen tying up the loose ends of a quiet celebration, walked in at that moment. To find Deacon there, pale and sweating, and when Deacon explained, Liam's jaw clenched until the knuckles were white, protective instincts flaring into something primal, something that remembered every terrible thing Sheila had done, every threat she'd issued, every chaos she'd sown into their lives. Sheila's not going to ruin this, Liam insisted, though the lie was thin. I promise you, Hope, nobody's going to take this from us, but Hope, who had loved and lost and learned to fear Hope itself, didn't want promises, she wanted plans and safety nets, and so instead of accepting Liam's bravado she asked for action. Call the police. File a report. Tell Brooke. Tell Ridge. Don't let her corner us, don't let her make this about revenge. And Deacon, seeing the bravery in Hope's eyes that had once drawn him to her in a different life, felt his chest tighten with guilt for what he'd started and resolve for what he had to finish. While all of that hum was unfolding, Sheila sat alone in a motel room miles from the crashing ocean, a map with names and faces spread across the bed like a macabre board game, her fingers tracing Lee's hospital, Taylor's favorite coffee shop, even little Hope's cabin on the edge of town, places that were vulnerable because they were loved, and she smiled because in her mind revenge was not a crime but an art, and every move had to be done with precision. She'd been patient, she'd been shunned, she'd been humiliated, and now she would be vindicated. Not with loud fights or public scenes but with quiet terror that made people look over their shoulders and whisper about safety. Lee, who had reported Sheila's earlier threats to a detective who'd shrugged at the paperwork and said the legal system had its limits, took matters into her own hands by showing up at Taylor's office unannounced, breathless, and determined, and together they made plans that were barely legal and entirely necessary: change locks, a temporary restraining order, extra police patrols near the places Sheila had mentioned, and Lee, whose life had been threatened before and who'd stood in hospital corridors with a courage cold enough to steady others, pressed Taylor's hand and said, "You don't have to do this alone," because in a world where enemies crossed lines that laws couldn't contain, loyalty and human presence were sometimes the only shields left. At Forrester Creations the news of the engagement, which had been met by hugs and champagne only the day before, now felt fragile, like crystal that could shatter with a single cruel drop, and Steffi, who had been forced into the role of the protector and the betrayer in different chapters of her life, turned into a strategist overnight, calling in favors, whispering into phones, pulling in legal counsel and security, not because she wanted to ruin Hope's moment but because she knew how quickly the storm could arrive and how merciless. Stubborn, practical, that refused to let anyone use violence to rewrite someone else's happiness. Meanwhile, Poppy and Sheila's unlikely alliance, a tangle of manipulation and need, was unraveling as Poppy, whose own miscalculations had cost her more than once, watched Sheila become unmoored, too volatile even for their past schemes, and Poppy's conscience, frayed but present, whispered that maybe there was a line she wouldn't cross again, that hurting innocent people for revenge's sake wasn't what she signed up for, even if life at their edges had taught her to take risks. As the web tightened, Luna, whose life had been a study in survival and deception, received a cryptic message that made her palms sweat, a photograph of Hope laughing with Liam, the timestamp visible, and a single typed sentence beneath it: "Enjoy while you can." And Luna, who had been playing low and hiding behind a story she'd crafted for her own reasons, felt a cold dread that this was more than posturing, it was a promise, and promises from people like Sheila were rarely broken without blood. The police, finally nudged into action by multiple reports and the sudden involvement of Forrester Creations' security team, assigned 2 detectives to the case, a weary veteran who'd seen too many domestic storms end badly and a younger, idealistic officer who still believed paperwork could stop madness. And they began putting together Sheila's pattern: motel stays, anonymous calls, the same kind of surveillance that made the city's underbelly feel claustrophobic and small. Under cover of this bureaucratic motion, small, eerie things began to happen. A car keyed outside Taylor's house, a bouquet of wilted flowers left at Hope's cabin with a note that read nothing but a name, Lee's unmarked car found with scratches as if someone had tried to take the wheel from the inside, none of it yet lethal, but every piece was a drumbeat, and in soap operatic logic drumbeats become storms. At night, Liam sat awake, ring heavy on his finger though it felt like a weight and not a token, replaying every moment with Sheila in it, remembering how she'd walked into lives and rearranged hearts the way hurricanes rearrange beaches. No one was immune, and he thought about Dad and about Bill, about the men who'd fought for control in other battles, and he swore he would not let this one be taken from him by fear. Hope, meanwhile, tried to reclaim a portion of normalcy by arranging a small engagement lunch with only their closest friends, a plan that was both defiant and fragile. But as guests filtered in, umbrellas of tension followed, Brooke with a forced brightness, Ridge with an unsteady calm, Steffi carrying the armor of a woman who'd been betrayed too often but who would die trying to protect a family that still needed her, and Thomas hovering on the edge, eyes scanning for the drama that had made him famous. During the lunch Lee noticed a man in the parking lot. Nondescript, with a baseball cap pulled low, photographing the scene from his car, and she alerted security with the kind of quiet hysteria that comes from someone who has seen too much to be surprised, and when security closed and the man sped away, a silent acknowledgement that this was escalating from threats to stalking. The cameras at Forrester Creations, usually full of creative gossip and runway rehearsals, captured a shadowy figure lurking near the loading docks at 3 in the morning. A clip that would later be slowed and enhanced and passed around like a relic, each frame feeding the growing paranoia. And Sheila, alone in a motel room, watched the city breathe from her window and whispered a litany of promises to herself, none of them tender, all of them final. At the same time Deacon, racked with guilt and love and a sort of clumsy heroism, decided to stop being a bystander to his own life. He started attending meetings with Taylor and Lee, pressing his person into the service of protection, calling in old favors, and trying to keep his own feelings in check because if he didn't he might put Taylor directly in harm's path. And the irony was bitter, his love was both his salvation and the potential instrument of someone else's rage. On a separate thread, Sheila made contact with a shadowy acquaintance from her past, a man who owed her and who had skills she admired, and their meeting was brief and clinical, no promises of loyalty, only a list of tasks and a cold exchange of cash that turned vengeance into logistics. And as the surveillance tightened and plans were made and every phone call seemed to carry the potential for catastrophe, the characters spun toward a convergence, a charity gala that Brooke insisted would show the world that fear wouldn't win, Deacon's decision to tell the truth about his feelings in a way that put Taylor directly in the crosshairs, Lee's frantic calls for police presence, and Sheila's quiet decision to strike not with spectacle but with precision, to make one carefully chosen move that would make headlines and hearts tremble. The night of the gala arrived like a held breath, chandeliers glittered, gowns flowed like rivers, and laughter filled the halls, but underneath the glamour the air was taut with fear. Hope and Liam, surrounded by well-wishers, shared a dance that felt pivotal and defiant. Brooke watched with a brittle smile.